Dutch Bros came to town, was instantly the cool kid on the block. And I was like, hey, I want to work there.
That's Darren Spicer, a Dutch Bros barista who fell in love with drive-thru coffee and was on track to become a franchisee. But fate had other plans.
I was 9 months into that 12-month prerequisite or that qualifier when Dutch Bros changed their model. They kind of just drew a line in the sand and said, hey, we're focused now on corporate-owned stores and growing that way.
But Darren didn't give up on his coffee dreams. Instead, he doubled down.
That was kind of the catalyst where I said, hey, I love this, and if the opportunity isn't here, that's okay. I forced myself to make an LLC of Clutch Coffee, and I'm like, all right, you're going to follow this investment, we're going to do it.
In this conversation, we go through the full journey, from store number 1 to being bought for $20 million by the brand where it all started.
Our grand opening was March 3rd of 2018. Store, 8, 9, or 10 maybe is where we kind of felt like, okay, we're in a rhythm now. We understand the process. Just one of those things where I think it made sense with the right brand, and incidentally became a full circle moment for me with Dutch Bros.
All in all, given the outcome now, do you feel like it was worth it? Hey guys, before getting to the episode, if you're considering buying a franchise, head to our website and book a free strategy session with one of our advisors, who are multi-unit and multi-brand franchise owners. There's about 3,000 active franchises in the United States today, and picking the right brand is one of the most important decisions you'll make. So reach out via our website and get guidance from someone who's already done it. The link is in the description as well. Enjoy the episode. I'm excited for this, man, because your journey starts and ends with Dutch Bros. So I'd love to hear about that first position that you had at Dutch Bros, because that really seems to be like your introduction to the coffee business.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked at a small local coffee chain, was my very first intro into coffee. And then very shortly thereafter, Dutch Bros came to town. In a small town in Oregon, Dutch Bros came to town, was instantly the cool kid on the block. And I was like, hey, I want to work there. That looks like they're having a lot more fun. It's upbeat. And so I literally went every Monday for like 5 weeks in a row, like same time at 10 a.m. And I'm like, hey, I really want to get a job here. So ultimately ended up getting a job as a barista there, and just had a great time, learned a ton of the foundational blocks that I've got now in terms of customer service, what it means to be a servant leader and to focus on people. And that was a great time. That was in 2005. I ended up working at Dutch Bros through college, which was a great balance to do that while also going to school, and loved it. And so then graduated, got a real job, but something kept pulling me back to, or an adult job, I should say, but something kept pulling me back to wanting to pursue coffee and specifically Dutch Bros. So yeah, the foundational pieces I got when I was, 19, 20, 21 years old ended up pulling me back later in life to really want to go chase it.
Yeah. And as far as being a barista at Dutch Bros, could you share some insight on what they trained you on that might be different than a lot of people who might just think of your typical Starbucks barista, or even I wouldn't necessarily call them baristas, but Dunkin's gotten much more into the beverage side of things over the last 5 to 6 years. But I know Dutch Bros and Drive-Thru coffee in general seems to do things a bit differently.
Yeah. So, I think one of their mantras they talk about is delivering a mind-blowing experience, right? And, if you listen to Trav Boersma, who's a mentor for me, the one living brother of Dutch Bros, he talks about, we're in the relationship business. Coffee and energy drinks and smoothies happen to be the medium, but we're in the relationship business. So having such an insane focus on that customer experience, you still want to have a great product, right? But it's an experience versus if you go to a Starbucks or a Dunkin', generally speaking, and really it's most QSR in general these days, it's going to be more transactional, right? You order at the speaker box, you pull up to the window, it opens to take money or to take your card, it'll close, they turn their back to you. All of those things are like taboo at Dutch Bros, and ultimately what was taboo at Clutch, right? We want to take that order face to face. There's nothing that replaces that human interaction, and I think Dutch Bros and Chick-fil-A were the two that really pushed that envelope. And then at the when you pull up to the window, like we have a designated person there, and Dutch Bros obviously taught us that, of having someone there who was focused on engaging in a conversation to ask you about your day, where you're going, what you're doing, investing into that relationship, which A is genuine and is part of the the differentiator. But B, it also makes time go a lot faster. Coffee's ready. These guys are great. So those were a couple of the big things that I think really helped to set Dutch Bros apart over the last, 30 years.
Well, I always think it's interesting because on the surface, someone might listen to what you said and say like, "Oh, why doesn't every coffee shop do that?" And the flip side is it's much more difficult to cultivate a labor force that's willing to put in that effort, be hospitable, have a smile on their face for what could be a long shift. I mean, for you stepping into that world as a first job in the coffee business, did you ever have days early on, back in 2005, 2006, where you were like, whoa, this is way harder to do than maybe I thought?
To be honest, no, because it was so much fun. Like we
Yeah.
had such a good time, right? And you're the life of the party, right? You're the host of the party. So you're hosting this party. There's surround sound music playing inside and out, right? A lot of the times it's too loud to where your neighbors, other businesses are like, can you turn that down? But you're having a great time. And you set that environment and that culture, especially when you have younger employees, make it fun, make it enjoyable for them to be there. So, you're learning the recipes, you're making sure you know how to do everything. Honestly, the hardest part back then, and this is going to make me sound old, the hardest part was there was no point of sale for taking transactions, right? So someone might rattle off a 5-drink order and you had to memorize it and you had to recite it back to them. So you're like, hey, small hot non-fat mocha with whip, a large iced vanilla latte, sugar-free, you had to memorize and repeat that back. So that was probably the hardest part, to be honest with you. Or you'd ask whipped cream and then 18 seconds later you'd forget. You're like, did they say whipped cream or not? Like you'd ask again. But that was probably the most challenging thing, I would say. Otherwise, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, holy crap. I didn't even consider that. You guys must have, I imagine the proliferation of digital POS systems helped you guys with order accuracy. Because I mean, that's especially the beverage space, the coffee space. I mean, that's like a meme where the person who orders like at Starbucks gets like a million different toppings and sugar pumps and flavors. So for you to have to memorize that is crazy.
Yeah, the joke was like you can make 20 decisions in one cup of coffee, right? In terms of the different things you can do. But it was an interesting evolution over time because it was a combination of that. And then also the original runner system in terms of going out and taking that order outside literally involves sticky notes and taking those sticky notes with the order, running it back inside, putting it on the espresso machine, and then going back out again. So that was kind of how that started. Then it went to, I believe it was BlackBerry was next. That was the first, like, can we text this in and text it to another phone that's set up there? And so then it just evolved over time to where it became a lot more efficient and, to your point, a lot more accurate. These were also the days where they had just a cash drawer. There was no actual like ring this in. So if someone asked us and said, well, what are your best selling drinks? I might be able to just tell you what I think my opinion is, but I had no data to be able to support it to say, oh yeah, we sell X% of, vanilla lattes versus anything else. So technology has helped a lot in many ways to improve some of that, the Wild West, the way it was.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Well, you worked at Dutch Bros for a while and they've since shut it down, but they did have a franchising program available for a while. Was that something you ever considered?
That was like the main reason I went back. So I graduated from college. I had a degree in business and sports marketing. I went and worked in pro sports. Realized I wasn't going to be fulfilled doing that. I performed well, but it took away my passion as a fan. And I'm like, I really enjoyed the coffee thing. So I went back in my mid-20s, back to Dutch Bros. Started off, at the same time, I had a full-time medical device sales career. So it was kind of living two lives. But I had full-time medical device sales. And then on top of that, I was going originally just working shifts, nights and weekends at a new store that had opened. I was paying a $6 bridge toll to go to work every day, to go over to work at this new Dutch Bros. And then I got poached to go manage a new location. And that was one of the biggest prerequisites for being able to franchise. You had to be a certain number of years at Dutch Bros. You had to manage for a year. So that was the next ticket, the next move. And I was 9 months into that 12-month prerequisite or that qualifier when Dutch Bros changed their model for the last time to say, hey, we're going to shift away from franchising to this new operator position. If I was 19 or 20 at that time, that might have been more appealing, where they said, hey, you can make $100,000 as a base. I also had a pretty successful medical device sales career, and I was in my later 20s, so I was kind of an anomaly. That would have represented a pretty significant pay cut for me. Yeah. And I also wouldn't have any skin in the game. So when they made that change, that was kind of the catalyst where I said, hey, I love this. And if the opportunity isn't here, that's okay. I understand it a lot more now than I did then, but I get it. And I'm going to go start my own. And I made that commitment to do that. And on my birthday, I think that was in 2014 or 2015, on my birthday, I hopped on LegalZoom. I forced myself to make an LLC of Clutch Coffee. And I'm like, all right, you're going to follow this investment. We're going to do it and, and get it going.
So the termination of the franchise program is what kind of planted the seed that you're just going to go found your own chain. But, I'm curious, did you talk to any, or maybe even still in touch with any other franchisees? Did I assume they got to maintain their franchise business even after the program stopped bringing in new people?
Yeah. I still have a lot of good friends who are still franchisees today, and they were just, timing was on their side. They were lucky enough to be able to get in, and that's all good. Again, I get it a lot more now from the other side of the coin, but yeah, that was they kind of just drew a line in the sand and said, hey, we're focused now on corporate owned stores and growing that way. And so that, I had a lot of help from some current franchisees helping guide me of like, hey, what are the steps I need to be taking to be eligible? Once that changed, I still asked some of them for advice, but it was a different game too, because all of them were handed a playbook. They didn't have to go create the brand. They didn't have to go get the IP. It was a lot more plug and play. So I, tapped some other mentors of mine who had started businesses, but we had to kind of forge on our own to do that.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting, even just hearing though the steps that you had to take to become a Dutch Bros franchisee. It kind of reminds me of the Domino's model, where they force you to, work in the store, and then eventually, I think you have to manage a store for like 12 months before you can even buy in as a franchisee.
Yep. No, I mean, it's smart. It really helped to protect the culture. Culture is the hardest thing to build and the easiest thing to lose if you don't protect it. So I commend how they approached that. Right, it really helped to weed out, if someone wasn't willing to do that, it told them, you're not serious about our brand in terms of how we want to do it, right? Plenty of people that had money that wanted to do it, but they were not willing to invest that time and effort to do it the way that Dutch Bros had asked. And so that was an easy way for them to kind of sift through people to see who was serious about it.
All right. Well, so the Dutch Bros franchise program disappointment happened, you said, around 2015. And how long did it take for you to open your grand opening first day of business for Clutch?
It was a couple of years. Our grand opening was March 3rd of 2018. So we spent a couple of years assembling our team. I had two other co-founders, so we all had very complementary skill sets. So getting that created. And then we also were looking at different geographies. Where do we want to do this? How are we going to fund it? Are we going to have to buy dirt? Are we going to be able to take over a second gen site? So there was a lot of evolutions there to see kind of where things would fall. And the opportunity we ended up getting for the first two locations, it was a 2-unit deal. They were a different coffee brand, and the guy was a franchisee of a different brand. He wanted to retire. So we were really buying, we weren't buying the brand. We were buying the access to the lease, control of the lease, and locations that we thought would perform well in North Carolina. So I signed that paperwork to make that deal official while I was on my honeymoon in Australia. So 5 a.m. call, my wife's like, we're supposed to be on, our honeymoon. I'm like, well, this is the next chapter of our lives. So
can you talk me through that gap period a bit more? Would you say that I know you had a full-time job in medical device sales. So was it more just as much time as you could dedicate on the side to getting things ready for Clutch? Was the reason for maybe a couple year gap, or were there real roadblocks that just simply took time? Like, I'd love to hear about how you went about finding your partners, because that's a big decision for any founder.
Yeah, and I think to your first question, I think it was a little bit of both. I think the road, you don't know what all the roadblocks are, and then as you continue to look, we were initially looking in San Diego, in East County, like El Cajon, La Mesa. And we couldn't find anything that was second generation. Every business that had opened was still going, or didn't have a drive-through, which we needed. So then we were like, okay, this is going to cost a lot more if we have to buy dirt or build, and we weren't capitalized to do that. In terms of the partners, we had two other co-founders. One had also worked at Dutch Bros with me. We had a good relationship in terms of that. He was an operational expert. And I was more of the culture building, sales, marketing, community integration. And then our third partner, we had met through mutual friends, was more of the finance, and actually was in the background for another coffee company at the time, was running finance, taxes, HR, payroll. So it was kind of like, great, these skill sets all mesh well together. This is kind of the dream team, if you will. And it took a little bit of time to kind of get everybody on the same page of what we wanted to do. But once we felt like we had that team, then we could move forward and say, okay, let's create, we have the entity. What do we need to do? We need to create a brand. We need to create, what is the name going to be? What does the logo look like? Going through all of those iterations. How are we going to fund it? How much money are we putting in? What's the structure of the ownership? A lot of pieces.
Yeah. The entity formation stuff can definitely kind of drag things out, and it's obviously really critical because it does kind of set the tone for the rest of the journey. I'm always curious to hear what was the inspiration for the name? Like, how did you guys land on Clutch Coffee?
Yeah, I'm a huge sports fan, and so when a player steps up and delivers in crunch time and they're clutch, I want us to be that for our customers every day.
Love it. Okay, super cool.
Now the funny part was about the name was like we caught some understandable strays on clutch sounds like Dutch, and it's like totally get it, but they were second, third generation dairy farmers that were Dutch origin, and this was a sports related thing. But yeah.
Well, back in, I guess this is 2018-ish when the site actually gets open, how much capital did you guys have to put in? I assume you had to use all your own personal capital across you and the two partners versus a bank wasn't going to finance you without a single location open.
Yeah. No, that's also the funny part about like the SBA, right? It's like, oh, it's meant to help you if you're a small business. Well, the reality is most of the time you can't get an SBA loan unless you're already proven and open for a certain amount of time. So it's kind of a misnomer. But yeah, I think the three of us collectively put in about $500,000 of our own capital to start it. And that number that we landed on was based on some of the economics of this deal that was a 2-location deal. So we said, okay, what's the acquisition cost? And then how much working capital we're going to put in to make sure we can renovate these stores. Like we renovated both in 90 days, and that's a shout out to our operational co-founder, who was just very technical and very, very savvy. So helped to get those flipped in 90 days. And then, what's our starting inventory, pre-opening marketing, labor, give ourselves a little bit of a working capital.
Yeah. And as far as the marketing, I think that's an interesting subject because you guys are a brand new company. You and one of your other co-founders' experiences coming from Dutch Bros, where they had an established brand in the region where you were operating. So did you guys have a playbook in mind, or was it trial by fire and just figuring out the best way to get the brand in front of eyeballs?
Great question. We had a couple pieces that we had taken from Dutch Bros, as an example, doing free drinks on grand opening day, which is something that I think not a lot of businesses will do these days because everyone looks and says, oh, well, that's expensive.
Yeah.
It's a marketing function, right? Like it is, but what's your customer acquisition cost? Like, how do you think about that? So like if we did a grand opening day and we spent, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000 in product, but you also had 3,000 people come through, I'll make that trade any day for new people to get into our system, to gather their information, their name, their phone number into our ecosystem. And they're having a great experience. They get to see something that's new. And the way we looked at it was like, even if you had to wait a longer time in line, it was free, right? Like if you didn't love it, it's okay. You're out a little bit of time, but that's it. You didn't have to spend anything. So we took things like that from them, but I don't think there was a super built out playbook on how to get into the community. We knew Dutch Bros taught us a lot in terms of like being very community centric, but they also had the advantage of people knew the brand, generally speaking, wherever they would go. So this was brand new where people are like, what is Clutch? And we're defining that. The airplane's getting built as we're going. So it's like, well, we're going to tell you what Clutch is like and what it's about, but we're learning as we go. So a lot of community integration, right? Like when we're training people to make drinks, don't dump those down the sink. We're taking those out and handing those out into the community, which takes just a lot of elbow grease. But doing that, finding local partnerships to do. Can we pop up at gyms that are always looking for value adds for their clientele? Are there other, can we sponsor a little league team? We did that right out of the gate, right? Get names on shirts, get brand awareness. And then we posted on social, for better or for worse. This is me on this one, but like we posted on social every single day for like 90 days leading up, right? To the point where people are like, what the hell is this thing? Okay, I got to go check this out. It's like all
Yeah.
over my social to build some of that, hype and excitement.
I love it. So just good old fashioned local marketing. And as far as hiring, especially because it seems like that was mostly in your purview as the culture builder, was there an education that had to be done? Because the drive-through coffee wave has really started west. I mean, with Dutch
Yeah.
Bros, right? And then now Seven Brew is exploding, but they're founded out of Arkansas, and drive-through coffee, even to this day, where I am in the Northeast, I've only seen like two maybe so far. So it's not common on the East Coast, relatively speaking, to the West. Was there any difficulties in just getting getting your employees to understand what they really had to do and the energy they had to bring?
Yes, and I have a great story on that. And also, fun fact: Seven Brew was started by a former Dutch Bros employee, actually originally. So before they got acquired in around 2018, I think 2018, 2019, it was started by a former Dutch Bros employee and her father, actually. So they branched off of Dutch Bros as well. Fun fact.
Didn't know that.
They're going all franchise, right? Versus corporate. But they do a good job. So yes, the education piece on explaining to people what we were going to be like. I remember sitting, we do the interviews in the first building. We have like two chairs and we hadn't finished wiring the speakers yet. So we have like a stereo that's playing music, trying to create a little bit of the energy and ambiance of what this is going to look like. And having questions asked that were totally fair questions, but that people that had worked at Dunkin', had worked at Starbucks, or had worked at Taco Bell, as an example, and like just traditional QSR where they're like, do we have to wear, visors? I'm like, no. Like, do we have to wear an apron? I'm like, absolutely not. Like, they're like, okay, like we get to listen to music while we're working. And they're like, oh, well, like, who chooses that? I'm like, you do. You guys are on the shift. No, it has to be the two rules. It can't be explicit and it can't be slow or sad. That's it. Like everything else is fair game. It needs to be upbeat, but age appropriate for everybody. And, so then you're kind of painting that picture, right? Of like another great question we got asked was, this was a culture shock for us. They said, do you offset tips? And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, in the state of North Carolina, if you make tips, the employer can offset that against the base wage. And to me and to us, a tip that someone gets is a token of appreciation for what they did. It's not mine. I didn't earn that. So it would never even cross my mind to do that. The fact that it's even a thing, is crazy. So we were like, that helped us differentiate. We're like, no, you're generally starting around minimum wage. But if you make $5 an hour in tips, that's yours. And so then it was like, they're like, wait, really? Like, so you could almost double your wage? And it's like, yeah, that's part of what I think is great about this industry, especially from a business perspective. That's a pass through from customers. So explaining a lot of that and just painting the picture, everything from that to like, they're like, well, what are these infused energy drinks? Not a thing on the East Coast, right? Education is growing more and more now, but it's like, hey, pick your, imagine you have a can of Red Bull and then add your favorite flavor, your fruit flavor, and infuse that. And you can do that over ice or minds blow. Like, what? So a lot of we had to educate ourselves, or even Americanos, teaching customers, right? They're like, I just want a coffee. I'm like, great. We do Americano style, so it's fresh when you make it. Like, well, I want a drip coffee. I'm like, there's a QT across the street. We don't do drip. I want it fresh on demand. And, a lot of education. So we learned a ton just going through the process.
And did you see then, did Clutch become this more competitive spot for employees to go to because of the upside in tips? Like, is that a common, today tip culture is kind of insane, but has it always been a big aspect of the drive-through coffee model where the employees are getting tips because they actually are providing a level of hospitality that you might not get elsewhere?
Yeah. And I think that's also just kind of culturally built in on coffee for whatever reason, relative, to say going through McDonald's or something else, coffee being a little bit more on the artisan side, I guess.
Yes.
It's just kind of more built in. We never ask, right? We're never it's like, hey, here's a tip screen. It's like, we're like, hey, it'll ask you a question and your signature, right? And it's totally they want to choose no, that's fine. On average, tips are about 10% of our total revenue. So people were making about 10% of that additionally. And, any cash tips they got to take home right then. That's what I loved when I was younger. You had walk around money, you had gas money, whatever. And then your credit tips came automatically on your check every couple of weeks. kind of like a built-in savings plan to help teenagers not blow it all right away. Um, and yeah, but it's a huge advantage in the coffee space, not only for hiring, but also for the company itself, not having to say, okay, I've got to pay a much higher wage to be competitive because you've got that, if you see a McDonald's posting at $10 or $11 an hour versus, in the Carolinas at 7.25 still, you could say, hey, you're going to make more than that with tips here, but we didn't have to carry the full water on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a big positive to the model. I want to ask this question for aspiring founders of brick and mortar brands, whether it's franchised or not, because we had, back in July of last year, I interviewed a big Little Caesars owner, but he also started his own independent drive-through coffee / dirty soda chain in San Diego.
Ryan, I know Ryan.
Oh yeah. So Coco
Yeah,
Playa,
buddy.
Ryan Fagali. And something though that he said that I thought was really interesting was, he's used to the world of Little Caesars and he also owns a few Jersey Mikes. So, he's dialed into his cost of goods for those brands. And obviously both brands have massive scale nationally. So the price he's getting for napkins and any food inputs are, relatively speaking, a lot lower than what he saw at Coco Playa because, for Little Caesars, he has the benefit of being part of a 3,000, 4,000 plus location brand, but Coco Playa is just one store. And he said, working through the math on what he could get his landed cost of goods at when he's selling the product, it was a lot more difficult. And it just gave him a respect and an appreciation for anyone who's founding a brand because it is harder to make the economics work when you're starting from scratch. So when you started with Clutch, like, did you have the, not input, I guess, did you have the, awareness of what the economics and the cogs look like your basic P&L would look like at a Dutch Bros? Or was it not that granular for you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes and no. We had an idea of the range it should be and the target and the ceiling we didn't want to go above, but we also were comparing a bit of apples to oranges because Dutch Bros at that point, let's see, when we started 2018, I mean, they had several hundred stores at that point. So they had some, economies of scale that we didn't have. So we knew we weren't going to be able to get coffee at the same price, right? And some of the, or Torani syrup wasn't going to be the same price. So we kind of had to bake in some buffer to say, okay, what do we look like at 2 stores out of the gate? And then we just tried to be aggressive on the front end with our vendors to say, hey, let's set some benchmarks together. When we get to store 5 or when we get to a certain volume, can we get a price break, right? Can we chip away at this a little bit? And so we tried to be, thoughtful on that. But yeah, we had an idea of where we needed to be successful. We had like a goal and a stretch goal, I would say. And, part of that, a lot of it's learning. And when we started, I think we probably had 10 different vendors probably. We eventually consolidated that into a broadline distributor as we grew. But yeah, I would say early days, our COGS were in the high 30s probably. When we finished, like our most recent quarter, I think was like 31%. It still has room to, it still has a lot of meat on the bone to get better versus like Dutch Bros being at, 25% or so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy the benefits of scale relative to when you're starting out. How did you design Clutch compared to Dutch Bros? Was it in your mind, hey, Dutch Bros is killing it, let's just bring it out east and we're going to dominate because they're not here yet, like carbon copy? Or did you change anything from the menu to the store layout or anything along those lines?
Yeah, great question. So we don't claim to have invented the wheel, right? But there were a lot of things we loved that they taught us. And then a few things we wanted to really improve upon or have our own spin. So to kind of work in reverse order of your question there, like menu wise, right? We wanted to have a little bit more of a diverse menu, some things that were a little bit more unique and innovative. On the innovation side, we created the muscle mocha out of the gate, which was actually inspired by my wife, who's like, hey, I'm tired of drinking a protein shake and a coffee every morning. Find a way to fuse this together. Cool, we can do that. And then, now you see protein is a huge push by Dutch Bros and Starbucks, 6-7 years later. We also wanted to have like a juice category. Like, could we pull customers that were maybe going to Jamba Juice, right? Could you have something else that other places weren't doing or other coffee places? We found an awesome vendor with Smart Fruit, based out of New York. that is 100% fruit juice, no added sugar. So we love that. And as a parent, I love that as an option for kids too, right? Because a lot of coffee drinks do have a fair amount of sugar in them. So finding things that were a little bit more healthy for customers in general was big. So I think that was one thing. We definitely wanted to maximize the quality of product. So when we were looking at what roasters to use, because Dutch Bros still then and still today is vertically integrated, they roast their own coffee. We looked at 30 different blends from 6 different roasters and said, we did a blind taste test, said price doesn't matter. We want the best quality. And the one that we all unanimously agreed on, of course, was one of the 3 most expensive. But that's okay. Like we want, if you're going to pay, honestly, if you're going to pay $5 or $6 for a cup of hot coffee, it better be phenomenal. And so a lot of pride with our roaster. Shout out to Delanos in Washington State. They're phenomenal from day one until the end. And they just did a great job of being consistent, being great to work with, helping grow with us. So the quality there, I would still put up our espresso against any of the big players. Like, and I don't think it's close. We wanted to have better on the quality. And then the last piece that I think was really important was, Dutch Bros actually did a great job about talking about what they could do to help or challenging and encouraging people of like, where do you want to go? What are your goals? And what action are you willing to take? I wanted us at Clutch to take a step further and actually be Clutch for our employees and say, hey, let us through our networks help open those doors, right? You want to become a photographer or a videographer? Awesome. Let's have you do a little bit of an internship on actually helping you do some of our social, right? What other connections and doors can we open? And that's one example, but like actually helping people, there was another one that wanted to get into medical sales. I happen to have that background, right? Help get them their first set of interviews once they graduated college. So those kinds of things I wanted to be really tangibly impactful. And I thought that was something that we could do, an elevated job of.
No, I love that. I think any company, especially in this world of, broader QSR, right? It's very difficult to be able to get to a point where you can provide like real benefits like that. So it's obviously great for the business once you can, because employees are going to want to stay and work for you. But it's also just, phenomenal initiative and way to give other people opportunity. As far as the menu change with the juice, and I love the protein combo, you guys were definitely very early to that trend. Did the menu hold throughout the life cycle of Clutch, or did you maybe run into some roadblocks where the ops got a little bit less streamlined because you had juice drinks, you had coffee drinks, and maybe it was too much, or did you guys still have the system ready to go?
Good question. This was a very, over the years, became a healthy debate internally of like, is the menu too wide? Is it, can we make it narrower? And to take ownership, I was always on the end of the spectrum of it. Like I wanted it to be wider. And a lot of the team was like, yo, we gotta narrow this down. So I take ownership of that. Kind of the mindset of wanting to have something for everyone. Someone's like, oh, I don't drink coffee. Great. We have smoothies, energy drinks, juices, teas, shakes. Like, you're not going to say no to 8 different things. So it ended up holding over time. It got refined. So I think we tried to use the data to tell us what drinks were popular, what weren't. When we do a limited time offer, and if it became such a huge success, maybe we should move this as a staple of the menu and bump something else that's not performing well. And so we did that. Like our best LTO ever was the Cheerwine partnership we did, which Cheerwine's 108 or 110-year-old soda brand based out of North Carolina. So we partnered and did a Cheerwine mocha and a Cheerwine energy drink, and it just crushed. So that was a fun, like 2 Carolina brands working together. It ended up bumping an item that had been on there since day one, a coconut infused mocha, like that went off the menu. So we innovated there and tried to, over time, tried to do our best there. Some categories morphed where like our smoothie brand went from one brand to another, which we thought was a better for you product and better COGS. So that was a win-win. And then the big other piece of the menu migration was, over the last couple of years, was integrating hot food and hot breakfast sandwiches. That was our number one request from customers saying, hey, how could Clutch get better? Make it a one-stop shop, right? Don't make me go somewhere else to get that. And, execution is huge and quality is huge on that. So that we bounced around a little bit to find our sweet spot there, but eventually got to a healthy spot.
Yeah, I always think with any business, I mean, right, mandate creep for a restaurant, menu creep, right? There's just so many different things that can sound like a great idea, and then it it becomes complicated operationally. Sounds like though you guys pretty much stuck with it for the most part. I want to get back to your actual grand opening. So when location number one did open in 2018, was it what you guys expected? Was it gangbusters, or did you guys kind of open up with maybe more of a disappointing result where you're thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a little bit more work?
Yeah. No, good question. And I think we did free small drinks that first day. And it's, you know, all the things I talked about with like posting on social every day and getting in the community. You do all the legwork and it's still, it never changes from store one to store 17 or 30. Like you still never know until you get to that opening day. It's a weird like anxiety feeling. And that first day, I believe it was free small drinks specifically, but I remember we did about $11,500 worth of free small drinks that day, which was huge. The line was probably 20 to 25 cars long the whole day. We went from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. I mean, the team was exhausted after that, but we did a phenomenal job of our average speed. And people, and then you're seeing the reviews start to flow in because we had no reviews yet. And then people are commenting on social and tagging. And while overseeing, I'm like responding to every single DM or tag. Thanks so much, reposting, and all the comments, like it felt like validation where people were like, wow, they were super friendly. The line was long, but it moved so quick. The drink was great. I found my new place. And you're like, all right, we're on to something here.
Yeah, that's like, all right, we're in the game now.
Yeah.
But you still had a full-time job when that location opened, right? So at what point do you decide to go all in on Clutch?
Yeah. So 4 months after we opened March 3rd of 2018. I left my med device position in July of that year. So I had a little bit of crossover, right? I took an 80% pay cut when I left med device to take a pebbly little salary at Clutch, what we could afford. And so I wanted to have at least enough runway, to say, okay, I can absorb a little bit of that hit. But yeah, 4 months later, I resigned. I was the national director of sales for a med device company based out of California. And I resigned to, chase the dream.
Was that your own choice? Did your partner say, hey, you need to be all in if you're going to be doing this? What was the structure with them at the time?
Yeah, it was a little bit of both. I mean, I think there was they were the lead on that of like, hey, if we're going to give this everything we've got, this can't just be like a half-assed side thing. Like we need to actually commit to it. One of the other co-founders had moved from Texas out to North Carolina full-time. And then when I left my med device position, my wife was still in California. I was in North Carolina 22 days a month for a year and a half, leading right up into COVID. So I'd go like out for 11 days, home for 4. So she wouldn't divorce me, and then out for 11 again. And so, yeah, I think they led on some of that of like, hey, are you going to be committed? Are you in? We've got 2 stores, the other co-founder that's there can't do all of that by himself, especially if we're going to grow. And so, made the tough decision there. And we had seen some traction where it's like, I want to see where this can go. Yeah. And so, my thought was if we fail, we'll fail fast. And I can always go back to med device. No one's ever going to ding me for saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you took the risk to go start your own thing. So we went for it.
And by the time that you were leaving med device to go full-time on Clutch, that second location was open as well? Because I know you said the initial acquisition for your first sites was a 2-unit deal off of a franchisee. Yep.
We opened the second one 4 weeks later. So March 3rd and then March 31st, wow. We said, okay, let's get this first one. Because we were at that juncture, we were going to be paying dark rent. And we're like, we need to bring in, some revenue. So we got the first store up and trained. And then we kind of did a divide and conquer between the 2 of us on the ground to each kind of own one of those stores, so to speak, and get those going. So it was back to back. And then we didn't open the third one until September 5th of 2020.
Oh, okay. So you opened the first 2 stores within the month of each other, and number 3 doesn't come till, what is that? Over 2 years later.
Yep. 2.5 years. Yep.
Holy crap. And that's more after the peak of COVID, but we're still in COVID times relatively.
It was still, it was like 6 months into COVID where like you're still, the ads you're showing, the dark ads you're showing to drive and promote a store, you're wearing masks. Like it's kind of wild looking back at a lot of that. But we had, it was a pretty low risk third location. And we we were like, hey, we need to, who knows how long this is going to last, but like COVID was a bump for us. Like like in the full calendar year for when COVID happened, we grew 40% year over year because I think we were fortunate that we were already set up to be a takeaway thing, right? If we had been a sit down cafe, you're toast. But because we were already set up and people wanted to get out of the house, see a different face, get some fresh air, get a human interaction, it was perfect for us.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think when you look back on COVID, the kind of trends are that all the businesses that were set up for takeaway, like, I mean, pizza chains and Domino's especially crushed. DoorDash, interestingly, for like the third-party delivery platforms, they took insane market share because they were the only one who was set up for the suburbs at that point. And yeah, now they own the biggest percentage of that market. So yeah, it's funny how in some ways COVID was actually a tailwind for businesses. But I wanted to hear about why didn't you open more stores in that time frame? Because in my head, I'm thinking, well, you got 2 open in a month. Maybe you guys would have had a third in 2019, a fourth at the beginning of 2020. But was there anything operationally that became challenging, or yeah, like what was going on in that between, let's say, store 2 and 3?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a couple things. One, our team was our leadership team, our founder team, the 3 of us were kind of along and this is an interesting thing for like partner selection, along a different line on the spectrum of risk tolerance, right? I was typically more, for better or for worse, probably both over time, of wanting to be more aggressive. We had a partner that was kind of in the middle, and we had a partner that was a lot more conservative, which is fine. And so a little bit of that was getting aligned there. It was also a combination of finding the right location that we could afford. The first 5 we did were all already existing buildings, drive-through conversion, whether it was from a coffee place, we converted a Wells Fargo bank drive-through, Smoothie King. So finding those, like what was available, where we were at, and then were we prepared to take that next step? Because that third one opened up, it was like an hour away, geography-wise. So how are we going to manage that? What's the responsibilities like there? And then also, cash flow, right? And so our first 2 stores came out of the gate kind of at sea level, which, you never know exactly what to expect. And then I would say probably within a year, they started to create some retained earnings on a consistent basis that still allowed, still absorbed the 2 of our salaries as well. So it was a confluence of those things.
And so when you say sea level, does that mean you're breaking even, including your salary? So technically we could say like the 4-wall margins were profitable, but because you're drawing a salary and you have your other co-founder is too.
Yep. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. And you said that third site was lower risk, or to you felt low risk. Was it just a phenomenal location, or what about that gave you guys a lot of confidence?
Interestingly, it ended up being probably one of the pound for pound, probably one of the poorest locations, I would say, in terms of quality. But it was turnkey in terms of like, I think we upfitted and renovated it for like 40 grand maybe, which again, like one of our partners that was very hands-on and technical helped us to do that budget wise. But I think it was like the rent was like 3 grand a month, right? And so it was like, okay, what do we need to do sales wise to break even there, right? The bar wasn't super high. I want to say it was like we needed to do $1,500 or $1,600 a day to break even there. So it wasn't a crazy expectation versus like if you fast forward to like the build-to-suits we ended up doing towards the end, on a nice, like on a grade A site, those rents are $11,000-$12,000 a month.
Yeah. What was this third site? Was the ceiling a lot lower though? Given usually there's kind of
it was, yeah. So ceiling was for sure lower. Like that store lost. It had a very slight burn for 2.5 years, and then we turned that positive. And then I think probably where that finished, it was probably making on a 4-wall basis, it was probably making 125, 150 a year. But again, just low risk in terms of like, okay, can we grow? Can we actually start to create a brand and a chain? But it was kind of like, I think I would also say we had a little bit of a flawed approach early of like thinking about that and saying, okay, well, we were so focused on like, well, here's our floor, right? Here's the worst case scenario. It's like, but we need to retool that thinking. And we did over time of like, where do you want to be, right? Where are people at? Is it easy to access? Is it easy to see? Things we got better at over time.
This tension that Darren is circling would come to a tipping point. As you can tell, in the early days of Clutch Coffee, Darren and his partners were operating more defensively. They were focused on protecting their downside rather than being aggressive and going after the upside by picking Tier A locations in the best markets. But up to this point, we're heading into 2021, and Clutch Coffee has just 3 locations. But as Darren is about to explain, they would soon enter a new chapter of their journey where they'd professionalize their go to market strategy and would put their foot on the accelerator.
Yeah, so there's kind of there's two vintages for Clutch, right? So the first vintage, I think, is the first 5 stores that were all conversions. So number 3 opened in 2020, 4 and 5 opened in the spring of 21 in Greensboro and in Clemens. So they were starting to kind of infill the Triad area. And then number 6, we had actually one of our 2 founders. He actually his day job at the time was a derivatives trader for Morgan Stanley on Wall Street. So he was a little bit more capitalized to be able to say, hey, we found a really good site. We could buy the dirt, and I have a developer. We could develop this thing. So that was our first build-to-suit in Rock Hill. And that one opened. And then at that point, so that was kind of like the end of the first vintage. Then to answer your question of when did we feel like we started to kind of get in our rhythm, it was probably after we brought on our lead investor partner, who was also a preferred developer. And they helped us to kind of say, okay, put your big boy pants on. You need to actually have processes. We need to have a real estate committee, right? This isn't like your gut feeling. Let's go off of data. And that's when we started, like 7 through 17 were build-to-suit locations, finding the right locations, and then, having that cost amortized into the lease. So I would say probably like store, 8, 9 or 10 maybe is where we kind of felt like, okay, we're in a rhythm now. We understand the process. Now it's a matter of picking the right sites and getting those stores open correctly.
And so you brought in a new partner that was not only an investor and an equity partner, but they were their job and their company was building out locations for QSR brands.
Yep, correct. Yeah, and they had not just QSR, but they had a lot of experience with building early childhood education, like KinderCare, et cetera. They had built some other coffee places in different areas of the country, so they had an idea of how to do that. And I think we were seeking real estate expertise at the time, so it was a needed lift, and they also had a desire to put skin in the game on Clutch as well. So they took advantage of both opportunities.
So how critical do you view that now looking back with the site selection expertise that they were able to provide? Like, was there a meaningful change after you started working with this partner?
Yeah, I mean, in a couple ways. So one, the meaningful change was the rents got a lot more expensive. So your risk appetite, because if you're gonna amortize that cost in, your rents went. I think our most expensive rent before then was like $6,000, and then those all jumped to like anywhere from 9 to 12. So that was like a little bit more like, okay, we're gonna go for where do you want to be? So I think that was a categorical change. The other thing, the ceilings got higher in terms of potential. At the same time, to be fair, if you missed on a site, which we did, but if you missed on a site, that drag gets real. Like, it's not like, oh, you're losing, that third store, Winston, was losing like $1 or $2,000 a month for the first couple of years. Like, big deal. Who cares?
Yeah.
Like, when you have a store you missed on and it's losing $10,000 a month, that's real, right? And so those two things probably changed. I mean, we had some like awesome sites. We hit, triples or home runs out of the gate, came out north of $1 million AUV, and it's like, this is great. Let's get more of these going. But then a couple of the misses, right, or learning lessons that you signed on 5 years ago, and you're like, if I could do that over again, we wouldn't have done that. You have to manage those out of that drag, or what do you want to do, right? Do you want to close it, or how do you want to go about it? Do you want to sublet it? Those kinds of things.
Can you talk about one of the misses? Like, do you have a post-mortem of knowing why it went wrong, or maybe you guys maybe did some spreadsheet math and probably had population data and all this good stuff that told you, oh, this is going to crush. But if it didn't, did you ever figure out why?
Yeah. I would say there's a location in Columbia, South Carolina, that on paper, had a lot of development going on around it that looked solid, had pretty busy traffic counts. The site we ended up doing wasn't, I wouldn't call it the most accessible. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't like a layup either. And the co-tenancy around it and actually the demographic around it was just off the mark in terms of what we knew would be successful in terms of performance. So wrong co-tenancy, wrong demographic, and that's on us. We just, and in terms of an overlook to not get more deeper into the weeds on some of that. And so looking back at that, it's like when you look at a lot of the statistical markers that we got better at over time, massive outliers on that site, which ended up being more of a drag in general. And those were things we had to manage.
As far as the demographics, I'm speculating, but I would love to hear. Do you guys did Clutch have more success with Gen Z and younger demographics, and maybe like the Columbia location you're talking about was skewed older in terms of the population?
Yeah, I would say skewed older. We had a lot of success in, commuter suburbia neighborhoods and people that were leaving a neighborhood to go commute in. And the setup here in that location wasn't that specifically. The daytime population was a different demographic. And so it's not to say that it couldn't be successful, but I had no data to support that I could say, hey, this is going to be automatic. This is going to be great. So that was, I would say, that understanding like household incomes, right? Where are we at with those? Missed the mark. Education level missed the mark. It just wasn't the right spot.
No, I think it's always interesting to hear that, but also just helpful for franchisees and brick and mortar entrepreneurs to really understand like the different factors that can swing a location. With this new investor, the property developer, did you guys then build from units 6 through 20 everything, or did you end up do more second gen sites that you just converted into a Clutch?
Almost everything was a new build. I think the only one that was a second gen was our site in Monroe, North Carolina. That was originally like a drive-through taqueria in its first life. So even then we did a little bit of modification to the exterior to make it stand out a little bit more. But almost everything else was a brand new, like preferred developer would buy the dirt, build the building, and then hand that off to us to operate.
Yeah. And well, so as you're scaling, for you as the culture builder, which I just think it's ultimately the biggest differentiation, right? Like labor's pretty much always the big constraint for any brick and mortar business. And then when you think of fast food and QSR, I mean, the turnover rates are off the charts. And it's often why a lot of entrepreneurs don't even want to get into that industry. So for you, did you have a hard time keeping up with another round of baristas, more culture building at every new store? Or did you kind of find your rhythm and your groove with, what works for selecting the right people consistently?
Yeah, this is probably a big shout out to, she was our senior director of growth, Mo Holtz. She's the best culture builder I've ever met in my life in any industry. She used to be the lead corporate trainer at Dutch Bros when she left to come join us in 2020. Just an amazing individual. So she became an extension of me as, you think about like COVID hits where you can't travel, right? And then my wife and I start having a family, right? And so then the amount of time spent in the Carolinas changed naturally. And she became an extension on the ground to just really make sure that we were nails on the operational side and the culture side. And so she had a great ability to hold you accountable and inspire you all at the same time. So that was really big. If someone didn't fit our culture, or you brought them on and you could tell it wasn't going to be a fit, pretty quickly we would promote them to customer, is what we would say, to put them in a different role, not inside the four walls, because it just, you let that fester and it's going to be an issue. Turnover rate is still a thing. I mean, it's real, especially when you're hiring younger people that are between 16 and 25 typically. Having said that, we had some awesome people that were with us for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. But you still have the turnover, and it's just kind of part of the gig. So, do our best to invest into people that hopefully they have a skill set they can take with them past Clutch in whatever they do. I think that was really important for us looking back, like on a younger generation who are so focused on electronics on their phone. Like you might see a group of, 20-year-olds sitting at a table and they all have their phones out and no one's talking to each other, right? So how can you teach them to be able to carry a conversation, to be able to look someone in the eye and have a face-to-face interaction? Those were big life skills we tried to, bestow upon them.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, that sounds like a real challenge. Yeah, I feel like everywhere you go, it's just heads down on phones, whether I'm on the subway or walking around, the city. It's just AirPods, headphones in. So yeah, that's a big undertaking for you guys.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it was, we had to set really, really solid ground rules, right? It's like, hey, phones are going in the cubby in the back, like, and it's not perfect. You're always battling it, but it's just trying to set the expectation. It's like, hey, you're on a shift for 4 or 5 hours. I know they're going to go to the bathroom at some point and go check their phone and do whatever. I get it. So you kind of walk a fine line where you're not, so aggressive that people, rebel. But we want them to be focused on the customers, right? There's nothing worse than like you pull up to the window and you see someone on their phone not paying attention to you. Like that, like makes my skin crawl. So we were very diligent about that piece.
Okay, yeah. How did you guys finance the new stores? At a certain point, did you get to develop a relationship with the bank that helped you guys finance, or was it cash flow from existing stores and potentially more capital contributed from you guys as the founders?
Yeah, we didn't take any other debt beyond like a COVID EIDL loan. We didn't take any other debt there, so it mostly came from retained earnings from the stores, and then because of the velocity that we wanted to grow, that required more capital to be infused faster than you could grow off retained earnings. So, we were getting into new stores like if it was a build to suit and they handled that piece between our tenant contribution, which would be reflective of keeping rents in a certain line, right? So they say, hey, if we buy this property, your rent's going to be here. But if you want to chip in 100 grand, we can drop it down. So between tenant contribution, pre-opening marketing, labor, inventory, and equipment, we were getting into stores for like, I would say 3 to 350 per store, which is a really, for a drive-through coffee, like that's very low. But if you want to open 5 of those a year, as an example, that's $1.5 million right there before you've even done anything. And that also means that's not absorbing a miss if you have a miss. So we had additional cash that was infused in from our lead investor partner because they were also, suggesting and kind of steering on like, hey, we need to have a certain amount of velocity here if you want to be taken seriously as a chain.
And while this is happening, are you guys starting to see a certain economic picture? Your AUVs maybe becoming more consistent, ideally profitability or the four-wall EBITDA. And if so, are you able to kind of share what your guys' benchmarks became for what is a healthy Clutch Coffee location?
Yeah, I think a million AUV is just a very nice round baseline to say, okay, like if all stores are at that, every store is very healthy and very profitable. Our best stores, we're doing around 1.6, 1.7 at the end. And then we had stores obviously that were lower. We averaged about a 1 million AUV, generally speaking. On a 4-wall basis, our best stores were around 30% on a 4-wall margin. Average was about 18%. If we'd done a little bit better job on some of the site selection, I think that number would probably be higher on an average basis. If we're kind of looking back at that. But that was kind of the general, economics.
Okay, super cool. And yeah, even on just like, maybe this isn't even possible as an exercise to do, but I'm just thinking of like your typical order. We talked about it earlier, right? Like there could theoretically be 20 different decisions to make just for one order of an iced coffee or something. But is there any like maybe your gross margin on a typical order just to give people an idea of like what the margin structure can be for like a beverage only focused business, which is very different, right, than your classic QSRs like a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A that you got beef costs, chicken costs that are skewing things all over the place.
Yep. So when we finished, our COGS was around 31%. Labor was in the mid 20s, right? So you're mid to high 50s in terms of gross between those two components. So there's a lot. It's at higher volumes, it's incredibly profitable, right? There's a lot of opportunity in beverage. You have minimal waste relative to food, right? That was probably our biggest thing to manage on food because food COGS were in the low 40s. So that dragged a bit, but you also were taking a ticket from a $7 ticket and making that a $10 or $11 average just from, incorporating in a $5 breakfast sandwich that helped to pull up the average. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever get into dirty soda, or did that not come onto the menu at all?
No, we didn't. Lots of debates about it, for sure. And it is wild to me how popular it is in terms of, and kudos to the brands like Swig that are doing a good job with it. It's very like our biggest thing was, okay, are we set up for this, and how easy is it to do? Right. We would have probably needed to retrofit with either soda guns, right, or actual beverage dispensing, machines that would allow you to have those taps. And so we didn't get to a spot with our units being on the smaller side. The question internally was like, hey, Darren, cool. You want the menu to be even wider now. What's going to get cut and where does it go? And, and are we focused on selling a $3.50, $4 soda, or are we focused on the things that we're really good at? So, in hindsight, probably could have done that. I think it would have pulled some people away from consuming energy drinks, which was a higher, not a higher margin, but a higher price point for us in terms of revenue. So we ended up not pulling it, but I do think it's got staying power clearly. So
yeah, and I'm just curious for your take. Do you see it as like a viable threat and competitor to just in general the coffee chains out there? Because there are, I mean, as a customer, I don't understand it, but the data so far is showing that like people are getting on a drive-through line at 7, 8 a.m. and they're drinking their dirty soda instead of whatever else they were drinking before these things existed.
I think it is presenting more competition and just an alternative, right? I don't think it's so linear to say I'm going to cold turkey give up coffee or energy drink to do the soda, but it disrupts in terms of someone might go somewhere else, or maybe it's more convenient, or they heard about this wild Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, and coconut combination that they've got to go try, right? Because people like to try new things. Have you tried this, right? Are you innovative? And there's a lot of different possibilities. The dirty soda is similar to energy drinks with the variety, but probably even more so because you've got different base sodas you can use to kind of start with. So I don't think it's a full cannibalization, but I think it just disrupts where people have another option. And then it kind of pulls, it pulls away and eats away into their routine or their habit.
Yeah, I totally hear you on kind of the novelty value it's providing at the moment. I'm curious to see, can that really sustain over not just a couple of years, but 5, 10 years? So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
I think geography wise, that's dependent too, right? Areas of the country that love drinking soda or sweeter things, like in the South, I think they'll rip it. And I think it'll do well. In an area that might be more health focused, it may be harder to gain, consistent traction that lasts.
Yeah. Well, maybe zooming in a bit further just in the coffee category, how do you view this drive-through movement, which is really led by Dutch Bros and Seven Brew, relative to the established competitors? It's interesting because I had a 100 location Dunkin' owner on the podcast at the end of 2025. And, he was obviously very aware of these drive-through chains expanding. But for him, Dunkin', he seems to think has a pretty good brand moat, obviously. But yeah, I'm curious, did you ever think through what your business, I guess the differences between you and like a Starbucks, and, do you see a certain consumer trend developing that benefits one versus the other?
Yeah. To me, I think Dutch Bros and Seven Brew over the next decade, that's going to be a Coke and Pepsi war. And I'm saying that acknowledging that like Starbucks isn't going anywhere, right? It's got 10,000 plus locations in, North America. It's not going anywhere. Same for Dunkin', right? Probably playing a little bit of a different game, but absolutely those brands are going to eat into over time. Will absolutely take away market share from those brands on a localized basis, because if you're winning on every platform, if you're delivering a better experience, a higher quality product, faster, and oftentimes more affordable, I think that's going to impact and hit quite a bit. So to me, I see that Coke and Pepsi war between those two that are they both have rocket fuel right now, and it'll be interesting. I mean, we kind of looked at it and said, okay, if that's Coke and Pepsi, like, are we like, as for us as a brand, right? I'm like, are we like 7-Up? Like, what's our niche, right? We're small. And how's that going to look over time? I think there's going to be more consolidation over time of what I would consider new wave brands. So new wave meaning like the path that Dutch Bros and now Seven Brew are blazing. I think there's gonna be more consolidation there as those two continue to gear up. And I would bet on those over, over a Starbucks or Dunkin', just in the sense of like they're going to be more in tune and focused on what customers want and actually understanding and delivering that great experience. And it's really hard with those other brands when you're at huge scale. If you don't have that culture already built, it's very hard to go implement that and have it not feel very inauthentic. Like I'll pick on Starbucks a little bit, right? When they had the initiative of we're going to bring 200,000 Sharpies in and we're going to write on every cup, right? You're forcing it. Like it doesn't feel genuine. Dutch Bros, Clutch, others have been writing on lids for years, right? And doing those things. We don't require it, but it culturally got built in, and then our baristas want to do it, right? Whether they're telling someone to have a great day or putting their name on it or like whatever it might be, a motivational, inspirational thing. So that's really hard to just like flip a light switch on and say, oh, we're going to do this now. It's like, okay, like, does it have staying power? I don't know for them.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely, one of the disadvantages of scale is trying to kind of unwind a certain culture that's taken hold of the organization. And I think that's especially true in chains and franchises where they're used to operating a certain way. So yeah, it's gonna be fascinating to kind of see how it all plays out within this coffee category. Back to your scaling journey, though. At one point, you said that uh, the developer was talking about velocity of growth, right? Like your developer partner. And I'm curious, given that franchising is, and no one's proved it better than Seven Brew, right? It is the ultimate growth accelerator if you get it right. Did you guys ever consider that at Clutch? Is to say, you know what, guys, we've built enough of a foundation here. We have enough corporate proof of concept. Let's go out and franchise this and expand far faster. Obviously, different business model, but yeah, was there ever conversations there?
Yeah, we had quite a few conversations. I mean, there's a whole folder of people that inquired about wanting to franchise. We were initially resistant because we didn't want the brand to get diluted, or someone who said, "Oh, I'm treating this like a traditional franchise. I might not be an actively engaged franchisee." I think Chick-fil-A's done a very good job of how they've structured it. Like, I don't think you can. I think you can have one or two stores max. You can't have 5, 10, 50, 100. Like they're very diligent about like this is, and when their AUVs are what they are, like it's plenty to manage.
Yeah.
So we resisted that initially, and then over time, when we looked at it and said, okay, well, what's our ultimate goal? Where are we going to be? We're either going to continue to grow as a corporately owned brand, or there's potential for M&A in the future. Franchising is a big lift, and if you don't do it correctly or half-ass it, like it's going to show. And we just didn't feel comfortable. Like if we were going to do it, it needed to be all in, fully dialed towards that. And I just don't think that was it. It would have been a disservice to franchisees if we had done it, because we weren't ready for that. I don't think we were ready for that. But yeah, so lots of conversations, lots of interest, but wasn't something that we ever ended up, pulling the trigger on.
I'm with you. If you're in it, you got to be in it to win it. It's got to be a full-time focus. So yeah, I mean, the brands that think of franchising as just an easy path to growth or a side hustle, as you put it, it does not go well. At what point did the Dutch Bros conversation start? Was it when you were at 20 locations already, or did you kind of keep the lines of communication open the whole time since you did have contacts there just from being an employee?
Yeah, we had good relationships. I mean, I'm a huge believer in networking and maintaining great relationships. I think people are the key to everything. So we maintained great relationship over the years. We had certain discussions or questions that were asked about, hey, what are Clutch's goals in the future, right? What are you guys looking to do? And so we kind of just hit a natural inflection point where it made sense to entertain those conversations a little bit more. And so we, kind of circled back and said, hey, we're open to discussing what that could look like. And it kind of just evolved from there. And, I would say a lot of that happened pretty quickly leading up to the actual transaction as things got a little bit more serious on things.
Okay. And so it sounds like there wasn't necessarily this plan of like, hey, let's build to a certain number and sell. It just kind of maybe, I don't want to say Dutch Bros convinced you guys, but you both seemed to meet at a point where you felt it was the right decision.
Yeah. We didn't have a certain number to say, hey, once we hit this, we're going shopping or anything like that. I think it was the right point in our trajectory, and the right point for them having just entered the Carolinas. They've got a couple locations there, but that's a big focus for them. So this gave them a boost to kind of have scale immediately. Seven Brew already has, at least 20 or 25 in the Carolinas. So this allowed Dutch Bros, I think, to get a strong foothold as well, to have that Coke and Pepsi war. So it made sense in each brand's life cycle. It lined up.
I don't know if you're allowed to share this, but did Seven Brew ever come knocking, or was it really just Dutch Bros you were talking to and no one else bidding in this process for the acquisition of Clutch?
Yeah, a great relationship with Seven Brew as well. Their CEO John Davison's awesome guy. It's a little bit of a different structure there and harder to do, I think, with them because of being franchised, where we were spanned over, I don't know, at least 5 different franchisees' geographies. So it's a lot messier of like, how does this work? Does corporate buy it? And so, I mean, like it wasn't as linear as Dutch Bros saying, hey, this is, you're all corporate owned. We're corporate owned now moving forward. Here's how we're going to do this. So, had some good discussions with them, but it wasn't as clean cut.
Yeah, it's actually interesting though, because I mean, if I'm Seven Brew corporate going to the franchisees, it's like, hey, if we don't buy this, you're now competing with Dutch Bros. So obviously,
that's fair. And I would say, they and we didn't get to the point of like going store by store on this, but they also, maintained a pretty set expectation on their real estate of what exactly they wanted. And they, versus saying, okay, we'll do everything. This makes sense. They were pretty specific about what they wanted in terms of site selection. I think a lot of that stems from Blackstone being behind them now and owning a lot of real estate. So, it's just one of those things where I think it made sense with the right brand, and incidentally became a full circle moment for me with Dutch Bros.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, man. I mean, and I can of course see the complications on Seven Brew's side of just being a franchise, and there would have been more stakeholders that had to give the green light for that to really work. So as far as the acquisition, I mean, the cat's out of the bag as far as Dutch Bros speaking on their recent earnings call, and that they talked multiple times about how it was about $20 million purchase price for Clutch. Was there any negotiation in that number, right? Were you guys pushing for a higher price, or did you feel like that it was a fair offer and it got done quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I think in any type of a deal, there's going to be some natural negotiation, right, on both sides. So there was some back and forth there in terms of looking at, total number of sites, what the price might look like for that, kind of as a package deal. I think at the end of the day, it landed, in a spot that made sense for both sides, for us and for them. If they, I think their benchmark they're looking at is, what does it cost to actually build a new one, right? And, maybe that cost didn't vary a ton from if you took an average of 20 stores, $20 million, roughly there, but more so on speed to market, right? And then grabbing more market share. I think there's some intangible benefits that were probably, beneficial for them. But yeah, just some natural negotiation. But I think what allowed it to get done is we were both in the same ballpark out of the gate.
Well, as far as the exit for you as the entrepreneur, I mean, it's kind of the dream moment for a lot of people, right? Just starting a company, growing it over a number of years, and then getting some multi-million-dollar payday. So for whatever you're willing to share, I mean, you had at least one or two other co-founders that had an equity stake in this business. Perhaps you guys still had some debt that would have had to have gotten paid off with the acquisition dollars. Is this life-changing money, or is it, this is nice and I can take some time off money? Or, what level of life-changing has this acquisition kind of been for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's nice, and I think it provides some time to kind of recenter and look at what the next chapter is. It's not setting off on an island and retiring. With regard to the, like as you mentioned, the other stakeholders, the lead developer partner that was also involved. But also at the same time, I think it's going to be I'm looking forward to the next chapter and the things that really fill my cup in terms of consulting and coaching and helping brands that are in similar spots to us or have aspirations of growing, helping them the things we did really well, helping them do those, and the mistakes we made, helping them avoid those. So yeah, I committed to my wife that I would take a month to kind of recenter. I'm already deviating from that a bit with some consulting opportunities that have come up. But that's kind of the next, the next focus, and I'm really excited to help others.
Okay, cool. Well, I want to double click on that in a second, but when you look back on your journey, you talked about, I mean, you gave up an 80% pay cut initially to get started on Clutch, and you were in North Carolina 22 out of 30 days of a month on the opposite coast from your wife and your family. All in all, given the outcome now, do you feel like it was worth it? Or you're like, well, that was actually still a hell of a grind for the amount of money I ended up making off of it?
I'll answer it in two parts. I mean,
Okay.
it was a hell of a grind, like no pun intended. It was a hell of a grind. I wouldn't change anything because I learned so much, right? And it opened other doors, right? One of the other companies that I've actually recently co-founded, I've had at Clutch, I had remote assistants. I had 5 remote assistants in the Philippines for the last several years. And I've had a lot of colleagues, other people in business ask like, hey, where did you find people to source these specific things? And so that kind of organically evolved to where we now have a brand called Time Back Talent that helps to place those people with people that are looking for assistance, really talented workforce at a much lower economic impact. So I wouldn't change anything. I think like I'd love to revisit this conversation in a year, and like there's doors that are opening, legitimately doors that are opening now that I think there's some really cool downstream benefits, things that will make me fill my cup and I'll be passionate about, but at the same time provide a better work-life balance. My kids are 6 and 4 now, right? And starting to be at the age of forming memories, and it's like, oh, dad's gone, those kinds of things I think will balance out better in the next chapter. So, no, I don't, you could look and say, oh, well, you sacrificed this much per year in terms of salary. I don't think that's the way to look at it. I think it's, hey, we had a good exit here. But then this is like the chat, I want to write a book in the next year about this, because I think there's a story to be told about, in a nice way, about having an opportunity removed and not letting that stop you and going to still chase it and go after what you want to do.
Yeah, no, man. I mean, it's a phenomenal outcome. Don't get me wrong. So, I mean, I think it's super inspiring because especially a lot of folks that I bring on this show are franchisees. So it's rare to find the true brick and mortar founder who kind of goes through the full life cycle, from inception of a concept to a multi-million-dollar exit, and especially to just a big brand and a big buyer like Dutch Bros. So I mean, you and your co-founders have done something that a lot of people aspire to do, and when you look at this world of brick and mortar businesses, QSR, is there any areas of focus that you're super interested in and looking at now that you kind of do have that time on your hands? And you've already mentioned kind of that offshore talent business as possibly one of them.
Yeah, I think that's something that is organically already happening, which is great. But it's funny on the QSR piece, because there's some concepts that I see, or categories that I think will continue to grow. I think the QSR taco or fast casual Mexicans area has room to grow. I still think, even though there's been some peaks and valleys in the gourmet cookie space, I think there's still opportunity for that category to grow. That's a hot take. Timeless. Yeah, and it's a time, like, if you can make a great cookie, you'll always be in business. Like that's not going to go out of style. Your execution and your differentiators are going to be a key point. But those are a couple things that I think will do well. My wife is like, you're not allowed to start anything brick and mortar for like 5 years, and I'm like, okay. She's like, how much fun did you have managing 400 teenagers? And I'm like, okay. But there's things that I'm interested in investing or consulting in that space, and helping people build out cultures, right? What does that look like, right? You have a great concept, you've opened a couple, awesome. How are you going to scale that? What's your plan? What does that look like? Yeah. So those are things that I think get me excited.
Okay. All right. So no You're not on the path to founding another concept just yet. It'll have to be a 5-year
If I
hiatus.
do, it's passive or more silent. It won't be in the coffee space for obvious reasons, but if I do it, helping some other people grow their brands, and if I get a chance to be part of that journey, then that's great. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, all right, man. This has been an awesome conversation. My closing question for everyone who comes on the show is, what person has played a big part in your life, but doesn't get maybe the credit that they deserve?
Ooh, and I'm not even saying this just to score the points at home, but it would be my wife for sure. I mean, she'd never even heard of Dutch Bros when we started dating, and she's like, I took her through one. She's like, this is when I was aspiring to franchise, and she's like, you want to be a barista for the rest of your life? And I'm like, no, think bigger. And even though she didn't know or understand it, then she went and she's like, okay, I get it. This is actually a great experience, great product. She's been there consistently in terms of, allowing me to go play barista for 22 days a month when that started. When we had kids, me still being gone 40-50% of the time, right? Early on. And it's just been a rock through all of that. So the next chapter I owe her for the next decade. I owe her back on that, but she's just been, phenomenal mom, has been I'll give her flowers, was the breadwinner while I was taking those massive pay cuts and was quick to remind me of that. But yeah, just a rock solid individual.
Amazing. Well, that's good to hear, man. And we appreciate you coming on the show, and congrats on all your success.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate you, man.
All right, guys, I'm here to debrief that episode. And wow, I really enjoyed that conversation. I think Darren's accomplished something that a lot of people aspire to. Founding your own brand, or I guess co-founding in his case, it's not easy to get it to the point where you have someone like Dutch Bros who wants to acquire you. And obviously for Darren, that was a full circle moment. So yeah, I'm going to run through some points here that I thought were interesting. But first thing I want to say is I had no idea that the original founders of Seven Brew came from Dutch Bros. That's just like an interesting fun fact that I'll be diving into and maybe writing about in my newsletter. So head to empirespod.com if you don't subscribe to my newsletter yet. I think that is an interesting thing to unpack. But as far as the episode, I mean, you heard Darren refer to his partners early on as the dream team of partners that he had. So that whole section just really highlighted to me, like, if you're going to found a concept, there are all these different areas that will require attention, right? Darren was on culture building. His partner, one of them was on operations and construction. The third was HR, payroll, finances, and so on. So if you're thinking of founding your own brand, you got to have those areas dialed in from day one. And if you can't do them all yourself, which most people don't have all three of those skill sets, then you either got to hire someone or it might make sense to bring on a partner. So I doubt Darren would have achieved the success he did without those partners. The second thing is, I think the timing was definitely on his side. I mean, the early exposure he had to Dutch Bros was great because I kind of said it in the interview, but Drive-Thru coffee really has started in the West and is making its way east now. But, by opening in North Carolina in 2018, that's very early to the Drive-Thru coffee game. And it's now not a secret that the model works. You heard him talk about this hospitality first mindset. And I also thought it was really interesting that he put Dutch Bros in the same sentence as Chick-fil-A. I have not been to a Dutch Bros, but everyone I've talked to and everything you see online, they do clearly have this like high energy. It's very much a customer first vibe that I've gotten. So I'm just interested to finally go to one to see if like they do kind of have, that power to be within the ballpark of a Chick-fil-A level of hospitality. But either way, again, he was early to the Drive-Thru coffee scene. And even it seemed like he said that from day one on the menu, they had that muscle mocha drink or whatever. And they were early to the protein trend. So he's clearly a dialed in kind of operator as far as understanding the dynamics of the category he's operating in. The third thing I think that is worth calling out is just how much sacrifice he put in for this. And I've seen this over and over again. It's definitely not like a prerequisite, but there are a non-trivial amount of successful operators who have to do something like Darren did, where they're traveling to another state. In this case, Darren was traveling to the other side of the country for 22 days out of every month. And he did that for 1.5 years. So he clearly was committed to this. And yeah, I mean, moving past that, to me, the biggest transition point in his success and the success of Clutch was when they kind of switched from this defensive mode of, you heard him talking about how the third location, they were like, oh, this is a no-brainer. And they were mainly basing that off of the fact that it was super low rent. And, right away, when he said that to me during the recording, that's why I followed up with, well, what about it was a no-brainer because like low rent usually implies too it's like not there's not much upside. And then he brings in that developer partner who really changed the way they operate and think about selecting new sites. And they went from offense to defense, or sorry, defense to offense, where they're like, let's go to the best areas, let's go where people are. And that developer partner really helped them, though, hone in on the demographics and the things you need to be looking at to know beforehand if that site might be a good location or not. And I did not bring this up in the interview, but Darren did mention, and so it may have been confusing. So that developer investor partner that we've referenced, he replaced the operating partner. Without getting into specifics, that operating partner, exited from the business in 2021. So there was kind of room, I suppose, for another equity partner. So that's where that developer partner came in and came from. So there was never more than 3 co-founders, right? It was always Darren and 2 others. I just think, really successful outcome for Darren. It's also worth calling out, like, clearly, he didn't say it was life-changing. He's not going to retire on a beach. So whenever you see like headlines of acquisitions and whatnot, in any brick and mortar business, I mean, there's always usually going to be some level of debt on the business that has to get paid off. And in this case, 2 other co-founders. So, you really do need probably really high exit values to kind of have that official retirement money. But nonetheless, I mean, Darren's clearly doing well for himself and has some cool things cooking. So super grateful he's able to come on. And I hope all of you enjoyed that episode.